with those who could not participate. Today, we're going to hear about the Secure Water Act from 3 presenters in the Bureau of Reclamation's WaterSmart program. Sherry Looper started with the Bureau of Reclamation in 2005 as a water conservation specialist, focusing on water management planning and the development and implementation of water conservation and water use efficiency financial assistance programs. In 2010, Sherry began serving as the Central Valley Project Resource Specialist, which is an interdisciplinary position working on agricultural, urban, and environmental water supply projects, which included serving as Reclamation's water transfer and groundwater banking coordinator. In 2018, Sherry was selected as the California Great Basin Deputy Regional Resource Manager and oversaw contracts, water rights, facilities engineering, water conservation, refuge water supply, lands, and recreation. Sherry is currently WaterSmart Drought Coordinator and has worked within the WaterSmart program since 2006. She has her Bachelor's of Science in Agriculture from California State University, Chico, and a master's degree from the University of California, Davis. Subrendu Gangopadhyay is a civil engineer with the Water Resources Engineering and Management Group at Reclamation's Technical Service Center in Denver, Colorado. Subrendu is primary author for the West-Wide Climate and Hydrology Assessment Report, which is a supporting document for the 2021 Secure Water Act report to Congress. Today, Subrendu will be presenting analysis and findings from the 2021 West-Wide Climate and Hydrology Assessment Report. Katie Schultz is a WaterSmart program analyst with the Water Resources and Planning Office in Denver, Colorado. Katie assisted in the development and design of the 2021 Secure Water Act online interactive web map. Today, Katie will be giving an overview of the online web map, and she will be demonstrating how to use the tool and access the data used in the tool. Katie has a BS in geology from Adams State University. She has a graduate degree in geographic information systems from the University of Denver. She previously worked with the Geological Society of America as a visiting geologist at Great Sand Dunes National Park. So before I hand it over, I want to let you know that we will take questions at the end of today's presentations. You'll be able to use the chat feature, raise your hand, or simply unmute yourself to speak. If, as we go along, you have questions, please capture them using the chat, and the presenters will address them at the end of the presentations. So with that, I'll pass it on to the presenters.
Thank you, Heather. I'm Sherry Looper, and I will be talking first here for Reclamation. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. So we are here today to talk about Reclamation's 2021 Secure Water Report and the West-Wide Climate Assessment that was done as part of that Secure Report. Today, I'm actually filling in for Avra Morgan, who I work with in Reclamation's Water Resources and Planning Office. So Avra was actually one of the lead coordinators in pulling this report together. So Katie, if you go ahead and go to the next slide. Great. So today we will give an overview and a background of the Secure Report and how it relates to Reclamation's mission. We will talk specifics about Reclamation's West-Wide Climate and Hydrology Assessment, which is a detailed technical analysis that supports the Secure Report. And finally, we will provide information about our secure web portal, which is actually available on Reclamation's climate website. And as Heather mentioned, Katie's going to do a demonstration of how this portal works and what its capabilities are. Next slide, please. So the 2009 Secure Water Act, Public Law 111-11, authorized Reclamation to undertake a climate change adaptation program that is primarily implemented through our Basin Studies program. The basin studies are focused on the 7 major reclamation river basins, which are pictured here on this slide, colored in there on the map. And the basin studies evaluate the water supply and demand and help ensure reliable water supplies by identifying the strategies to address imbalances in that supply and demand. The Secure Water Act requires us to report to Congress on a 5-year cycle on our progress in identifying and evaluating those risks of climate change to water resources and operations. Our report to Congress also includes information about our collaborations with partners and stakeholders to develop mitigation and adaptation strategies to address climate change impacts, as well as our coordination with other federal agencies. So we submitted reports in 2011, 2016, and now again in 2021. Next slide, Katie. So the authorities granted in the Secure Water Act are important to Reclamation in many ways, as Reclamation is a water management agency within the Department of Interior. Our mission is to deliver water and power within the 17 Western United States, and Reclamation is the nation's largest wholesaler of water, operating 338 reservoirs with a water storage capacity of about 140 million acre-feet. With that, we provide water to 140,000 Western farmers. And we are the second largest producer of hydroelectric power in the United States. Next slide, please. So how does climate change affect our mission? Well, rising temperatures, decreasing snowpack, changes to the volume of precipitation, and changes to timing of runoff all affect Reclamation's operations in several ways. It can impact the volume and timing of our water deliveries. It impacts our water quality and several other water uses, including recreation, hydropower production, and uses for environmental purposes, just to name a few. So on the slide here, this image is an image from our secure web portal that we'll again talk about later, but you can click on any one of those water management aspects and that's listed in that blue box, and it will bring up another box that will give you information and talk about the climate change impacts specific to those water management operations. Next slide, please. So the 2021 Secure Report really has 5 components, all of which are pictured here on this slide. The summary report to Congress, which is pictured there on the left, is a high-level report that draws information from specific basin chapters. So there's a chapter for each of those 7 basins that were mentioned earlier, and the overall West-wide assessment. The West-wide assessment is pictured there in the top middle, is a technical report that assesses climate change impacts that Subrinder will actually talk about in detail later. He's going to go through that West-wide assessment. The basin reports and fact sheets were developed for those 7 river basins, again, that were shown earlier in the previous slides. And they go through in detail the impacts that we're seeing from climate change in those particular basins. They also highlight our efforts to develop tools for addressing climate change and our collaborations with stakeholders to address those climate change impacts. And then that 5th one on the bottom right there is the interactive secure portal that really pulls the detailed information from the secure report together in an easy to use format. Next slide. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Subrendu, who's going to discuss the West-wide assessment. So Subrendu.
Thank you, Sherry. Katie, we can go to the next slide. So our kind of overall goal for the West-wide assessment is kind of doing an evaluation using climate information. And if you all have looked into our previous reports, most of our analysis pretty much was focused on using downscaled climate projections and hydroclimate projections. So what we did also do this time, in addition to using climate information from climate models, we also brought in paleohydrology information so that we could cover a longer time frame and use the paleohydrology data, which is derived from tree rings. And I'll talk a little more about it as we keep going along. And then we also did a fairly extensive drought analysis using both the paleo data and the climate projection information so that we could compare and contrast the results over a longer time frame. Next slide, Katie. So I'm going to talk a little bit in terms of our downscale hydroclimate projections. So in this report, we still use the CMA5 set of climate projections, but the downscaling method was different in this report. So we use the LOCA, which is one of the statistical downscaling algorithms that is available. And we looked into two RCPs, RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5. The RCP 4.5 is a lower scenario, and the RCP 8.5 is a higher scenario. And we looked into projections of future temperature, precipitation, snowpack, and stream flow across the West. Next slide, Katie. So what we want to point out is that the results from 2021 are largely consistent with the 2016 Secure Report. The 2016 Secure Report also used the CMA5 set of climate projections, but the downscaling method was different. It was called BCSD. So the key takeaways is temperatures will increase progressively through the future decades over the major reclamation river basins during the 21st century. The precipitation changes obviously vary considerably across the basins, with basins in the north, for example, the Columbia and the Missouri, generally showing an increase in precipitation. April 1st, snowpack will largely decrease for nearly all the major reclamation river basins. And the timing and quantity of stream flows will continue to change as temperature and precipitation levels change. And nearly half of the annual runoff is estimated to generally happen earlier in the major reclamation river basins. So here we kind of basically summarize the broader findings, but if you are interested in looking into specific numbers in river basins, that information is available in Chapter 3 of the report. Next slide, Katie. So as I mentioned, if you're interested in looking into specific numbers in terms of changes, these are summarized in Chapter 3 across various figures and tables. So this is kind of a snapshot of some of those results for the 8 major reclamation basins, and also comparing the 3 decades that we analyzed, 3 future decades, the 2020s, the 2050s, and the 2070s. And to calculate the change information, we use the 1990s decade as the reference. So it's important to keep in mind that reference period that is used to calculate these changes. And we report this information we have 43 key locations identified as part of our West-wide analysis. So you can find that information in the report. Next slide, Katie. So before kind of getting into some of the details with paleohydrology, I just want to give a quick overview of what that data is all about. So this information is based on tree rings, and the information embedded in tree rings is used to develop reconstructions of hydroclimate variables, for example, stream flows, which goes back centuries and before stream gauges were installed. So why is this information useful? These longer records of wet and dry periods can help us inform about duration, severity, and frequency of past droughts. So the 2021 assessment, we use paleohydrology to inform long-term planning, like I mentioned, in addition to projections of future climate. Next slide, Katie. So kind of talking a little bit more about the applications of paleohydrology. Using paleohydrology, the stream gauge record and future projections, we can compare past droughts to potential future droughts. We can also use paleohydrology to learn about likelihood of shifting in or out of a drought. We can have a better understanding about natural variability in our hydroclimate system. And knowing more about the occurrence of given drought events will help stakeholders to prepare and subsequently adapt to changing hydroclimate conditions. So the paleohydrology kind of helps us to form like a guide in terms of looking into how changes might be happening, and it kind of gives us a benchmark for natural climate variability. Next slide, Katie. So, like I mentioned, we did an extensive analysis of droughts using both the paleohydrology information, and specifically for the drought analysis, we used the reconstructed drought index, the Palmer Drought Severity Index, and the period for our historical reference, we used 1473 through 2005. The reasoning behind that is that was the time frame from when data was available for all the hurricanes across the Western US, starting back in 1473. So we also computed future projections of PDSI using the downscale information from the CMF5 GCM data, and we used the future period as 2006 through 2099. Then what we did is we looked into the changes in drought characteristics, for example, drought duration, drought severity, and drought interarrival time. When we are talking about droughts, it's important to understand how drought is defined. So in the report, in chapter 4 of the report, so we looked into a few different drought definitions. So when PDSI values were at 0 and below 0, so that was defined as a drought. We also used a 3-year moving average of PDSI values to define droughts. And the way we define severity is it's kind of the average PDSI over a given drought duration. So it's important to understand how each of these metrics were defined, and based on the drought definition used, you can see slightly different results. Next slide, Katie. This is an example of the type of results that we have in the report. Like I mentioned, that we use the historical period as 1473 through 2005, and we had the future going from 2006 to 2099. And we estimated in this example, the drought duration for both the RCP 4.5, which is the lower scenario, and then we had RCP 8.5, which is the higher scenario. And then on the right-hand side panel, what we calculated is the difference in drought duration, the change between the historical and the future. So these are the types of analysis and results you will be able to find in the report in chapter 4. So we do similar analysis also for drought severity. Next slide, Katie. So this is an analysis, what we refer to as drought regime shift analysis. So this is the likelihood of going into or coming out of a drought, and that varies across the West. So what you see here are 3 panels. The leftmost panel talks about if you are in a drought for 5 years, what's your likelihood of coming out of the drought in the next 5 years? The middle panel says that you're in a drought. What's the 5-year outlook if you're in a drought for 20 years? And the right-hand side panel shows if you're in a drought for 20 years, what's your outlook for 10 years? It's important to recall that this is looking into just the paleohydrologic information. Okay, so this is just based on historical PDSI data going from 1473 to 2005. And this is a focus on natural variability. So you can look into this type of information as kind of your guide, and if you wish, like a benchmark. Okay, under natural variability, how would droughts behave? So we provided that information for each of the huckades across the Western US. Next slide, Katie. So this is our content from chapter 6, and this is where we used the various planning, operations tool, management models, essentially available across reclamation in the major basins. And the question we were trying to answer here is, how might a river basin respond if distant past droughts were to occur today under current operating policies and water demands? Okay, so like I mentioned, the period of analysis is important. In this analysis, we go back to 1685. There are larger drought events, for example, in the Colorado Basin, which has happened before that, and we have not analyzed that as part of this. One of the goals for the WestFAST analysis is trying to do a consistent analysis across the different river basins, trying to show what are the different analysis possibilities with the data and the tools that we have. And when we get into some of our basin studies, that's where we dive into further detail analysis, maybe analysis very similar to this, but using different drought periods, different periods of record. Those kind of get into more the basin specific analysis. The WestFAST analysis is kind of a consistent analysis based on data available over selected time periods. So again, we were interested in looking into impacts of paleo droughts compared with more recent historical droughts. And these vary based on the river basin. And in the next slide, Katie, this is an example result for the Truckee River Basin. So what you see is the stream flow reconstructions in this case, and you see 3 paleo droughts, and then we look into a couple of more recent droughts and try to see what a certain reservoir metric would be telling us. And in this case, the storage target on June 30th in the Lahontan Reservoir would be impacted by distant past droughts, but not as much by recent historical droughts. So these are the kind of information one can get using analysis like this, and this is all detailed in chapter 6 of our report. Next slide, Katie. We also provide a demands analysis. In our 2016 Secure Water Act report, we had an extensive analysis for crop irrigation water requirements. So in this report, we focused on urban landscape water demand, so essentially one crop called turf grass. And we found that projected increase in temperature will lead to large increases in plant water consumption. So we also present results for some of the major selected cities across the West. And in this example here, future projections of water demand for warm season turf grass in Las Vegas would increase would show an increase of about 13.7 inches by the year 2020. So these are the types of information we have available in Chapter 7 of the report. Next slide, Katie. Our Chapter 8 of the report provides a synthesis of groundwater impacts. So this is a challenging problem to do a consistent analysis west-wide. So it's more of a synthesis of the work that has happened roughly between 2015 and now, by the time the report was developed. And we looked into climate-driven changes in recharge and discharge. And then we do a synthesis, like I mentioned, of existing work. But we had this collaboration with USGS starting in about 2015, and with the USGS Arizona Water Science Center. And this is in addition to a series of papers that came out over the last few years. We compiled the information for the entire Colorado River Basin in this USGS scientific investigation report, which came out last November. So we summarized the findings from this collaboration and this effort in Chapter 8 of the report, of the West-wide report. And what we find is that projected groundwater infiltration is going to be less in the lower Colorado Basin and more in the upper Colorado River Basin. But again, anytime you're looking into these results, it's important to consider what GCM projections were used, what was the downscaling method used, because each of them introduces some biases in the finding, and it's important to kind of keep that perspective when looking or analyzing these results. One of the other challenges is sometimes these works start with a certain set of GCMs, downscale GCMs, and new set of downscale GCMs become available. And you want to basically finish with the set of projections that you began your work with, say, 5 years back. And it's important to keep this in mind and just to look into these results as like one among the many possibilities. So I just wanted to make that point. Next slide, Katie. So we have an extensive chapter on uncertainty. We talk about uncertainty in all of our chapters relevant to the specific analysis, but we also wanted to kind of bring in what are some of the thought processes in terms of methods that is being used to look into an uncertainty analysis, So this we tried to capture in Chapter 9 of the report. So the information presented is an illustration of new and updated tools that water managers may be able to use to support risk analysis based on uncertain conditions, right? So it's this was an opportunity for us to capture some of that information in Chapter 9. Next slide, Katie. So this is my last slide before I hand it over to Katie. Just a quick summary in terms of new information and tools. So we have new downscale hydroclimate projections. We have streamflow reconstructions using tree rings. So we try to get a pretty extensive west-wide coverage in terms of reconstructed streamflow. We developed drought information for about 1,200 watersheds. These are HUC-8 watersheds. We did a west-wide drought analysis, a water supply reliability assessment, an urban demands assessment, and a groundwater synthesis. I'm going to next hand it over to Katie to talk a little bit more about our web portal and all the information that we have there. Katie.
All right, thanks, Shubhendu. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Thanks, Shubhendu. So the secure web portal, I was part of a team that helped design and develop the secure web portal. The main project manager, Brian Connolly, wasn't able to give this presentation, and usually he does this. So I've included his contact information if you have any technical questions that I may not be able to answer. So the secure web portal illustrates the content and data within the secure water, within the secure report. And it's an easy to use, interactive, media-rich platform that displays all of the drought information that was used in the Secure Water Act. And I'll be demoing it and going over it here in just a moment. And so yeah, as I just said, the website provides select opportunities to interact with the data and learn just a little bit more about how the report came together. And so I'm going to go ahead and demo that now. So I'm going to stop sharing. All right, and then just pull up the web portal. Okay, so the web portal is available through the Reclamation's website, and it's also available on the slides. We provided a link. And so here we have, this is the introduction page. This is the main page that you will come to when you come to and visit the site. There's several interactive pieces. I'm just going to touch on some of them, including background resources, some high-level information on increasing temperatures, decreasing snowpack, so on. So here on the introduction tab, I'm just going to start scrolling down. Here I mentioned there's some background resources. We have information about Reclamation, the Secure Water Act, and then each of the 3 reports that were published that Sherry mentioned, 2011, 2016, and then the 2021 report. As we scroll down, you'll see a familiar image that's been displayed a couple times through the presentation. Each one of these is interactive. So each one of these icons, if you hover, you can click on and learn a little bit more about the water management activities that we have reported on through the Secure Water Act report. If you keep scrolling down, there's a basin map of all of our major reclamation river basins. If you click this icon here, you can enable the map. It becomes a little bit interactive. You can click on a basin, and then it hyperlinks to the fact sheets that Sherry had mentioned earlier, as well as the individual chapter report. So each one of these are linked. And so you're able to go in there and quickly access information. Let's see, scrolling down here just to give an overview, just more hyperlinks. You know, this is just a web portal that brings all the information together in one place. All right, so scrolling back up to the top here on the innovations page, this is where you can view numerous partnership collaborations and different innovative approaches that are highlighted in the report. So again, we can just scroll down here, click on one of these, and it will take you right to the collaboration page, and it will tell you a little bit more about the collaboration. And there's some story maps that dive deeper into the collaboration efforts with some of our partners here. Let's see, moving on here to the West-wide assessment tab. This is where you can explore the projected changes in climate and hydrology across the West. And you can also learn how Reclamation uses climate change scenarios, how they modeled the downscaling approach, and different information describing uncertainty. So again, if you want to learn a little bit more information on each of these topics, they're hyperlinked, and again, you can just click it and it will go a little bit deeper into information, and then a nifty back button there. So then again, within the strategies tab, as well as the next step tab, there's information about how we work with other partners and stakeholders to support reliable water and power delivery, as well as how the Secure Report has evolved over the years and how we look to advance it into the future. That's here on the next step. So the next steps tab is it's like a timeline summary. And then, of course, the upcoming Secure Water Act report in 2026, and then beyond. All right, so finally, this last tab, this is the application and interactions tab. This is where you can see information related to all the data. I'm sorry, to all the data that was used in the secure report. And so I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate this. So here we'll look at projected changes in drought duration. Give it a moment just to load. All right, so here's the dashboard that Brian and team created. Over here on the left is just a little bit more information on how to get started, how to use this web portal. Over here on the right, we have a map legend, some more information on what's being displayed, how to use the tool here in the scenario comparison. And then these three boxes here display historical period data, lower scenario, the RCP 4.5 that Shubrendu talked about, and then the higher scenario, the RCP 8.5 that Shubrendu also talked about. And so I'm just going to run through a quick demo here. But first, these numbers here will update as you zoom in. So they change just a little bit. Maybe I'll go to a more extreme basin. So these numbers will update as you pan around and interact with the map. Again, you can also click on these HUC8s and it will break down the data for you as well, give you a little bit more information, for example, like the area. And so a quick demo here, we'll go ahead and we'll look at a lower scenario for 4.5, and as you can see, the map updates, and so do these boxes down here. So because we chose the lower scenario, RCP, the historical and higher scenario do not display. So we're just focusing here on the lower scenario. We can choose a river basin. So let's look at the Klamath. So it will zoom in and I guess pop out the basin that you're looking at. And again, it all updates automatically here. And you can also go down even further in the filters with the states, but we're just looking at 2 states now, so that's not necessary. And so again, you can just zoom in a little bit more. One thing that's important to remember here is that the lower scenario, historical, higher scenario, these numbers update to what is in the map frame only. So we can zoom in even further here, and you can see that this will update. Again, zoom out and it will update. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're coming in here trying to understand a little bit more about the lower scenario, higher scenario, and things like that. So I think, oh yeah, right. So one important thing, all the data that we have is available to the public for download. And to get that data up here on the hamburger icon here, we do have additional links. So you can get a link to the secure report PDF, go to the web portal, all of the different applications. And then this last one here, link to 2021 secure drought severity and duration data. Give this a click and then you're able to download the data. I believe it comes in a zip file. So you can download the data and work with it yourself. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and transfer it back to Sherry. So I'm going to do a quick transition here back to the PowerPoint. And then just to wrap it up here, I had mentioned that we will make these links available in the PowerPoint. And so they are here on this slide. And Sherry, I'll go ahead and pass it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. And as we go through and we keep talking about how it's Reclamation's secure report, we have to acknowledge that the secure report and everything that went into it, doing the assessments and the mitigation strategies, is a huge collaboration amongst not only our stakeholders, but other federal entities as well. So we just wanted to recognize some of those now, and that would be Reclamation's Technical Service Center, the USGS, the University of Arizona, Columbia University, Desert Research Institute, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, the Aspen Global Change Institute, and of course, all of our regional and area offices. So we just really wanted to make sure that we gave them the acknowledgements that was very well deserved. Next slide. We have done similar webinars to the one we're doing now that feature all of the different river basins that we have done the assessments and the impacts for climate change, and have associated PowerPoints with those as well. And if anybody is interested in going back and watching any of those, they are listed on our climate website. So that link is featured down there at the bottom of the slide. And as you can see, there will be one posted for each of those 7 river basins that we've discussed earlier today. Next slide. So at this point, what I'd like to point out on this slide, we have our main contacts for those who have worked on the secure report. So if you are interested in any one of the aspects that we've talked about today and would like some more information about that, these are the contacts that you would get in touch with. And with that, Katie, are you ready to do questions? I know that we have one question starting out in the chat.
Yes. Thank you, Sherry. Yes, we have one question so far in the chat, which is for Paleohydrology. How old are the average trees sampled? Do you use old growth trees like the Nevada bristlecones that can be several thousand years old, or old growth California redwoods?
So this is Shubhrandu here. We kind of collaborated on the development of the chronologies with our colleagues from University of Arizona and Connie Hoodhouse and Greg Peterson from USGS and his team up in Bozeman. So if you are really interested in knowing the specifics of those level of detail, I can put you in touch with them. So essentially, we kind of use the information that was provided by them.
Thanks, Shubhrandu. All right, got another question. Is it possible to go back to slide 17 for a little more explanation, please? They're trying to figure out the details. All right.
Yeah. So this slide, what was done was essentially an analysis of trying to answer the question: if you are in a certain hydrologic regime, and that can be either wet or dry, what is the kind of outlook? What is the probability or likelihood of coming out of that regime in certain number of future years? So this analysis was done just using the reconstructed PDSI information from 1473 to 2005 for every Huckade, right? And trying to give a picture, okay, if you are in, say, a drought for 5 years, what's the outlook of coming out of that drought in the next 5 years? If you are in a drought for 20 years, what's the probability or the likelihood of coming out of it in the next 5 years, which is the middle panel? And the panel C, if you are in a drought for 20 years, and what's the chances of coming out in next 10 years? So remember, this is based on natural variability. So I think, and there could be an immediate tendency, let's go back to the Colorado and say, we are in roughly 22 years drought. So what are the chances of coming out of this? This basically is just based on natural variability. Okay, so this is kind of, one needs to look into this as a reference. Okay, so there is no climate change information superimposed on this. So this is really important to remember, that this is just based on historical information, which includes a long reconstruction of PDSI and kind of focusing just on natural variability. We have if you go to the report, and if you are really interested in kind of looking into the further details on the analysis, we have the references. So basically there are two papers, one in 2010 and in GRL with myself and Greg McCabe. And there is another paper in Nature Scientific Reports, which came out in 2019, where we did a similar analysis for using stream flow reconstruction. So, but here we wanted to do a similar analysis using PDSI. That way you can look into a more spatial, picture of these transitions. Does that help? I can elaborate further if we need.
No, I think that's good, Shubrendu. They said it makes more sense now. Thank you. These are good questions. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, this is, can you hear me? This is Roger Gorky from EPA. And
Yes.
I think, Sabrenda, you just kind of touched on my question on, well, I better understand this slide about coming out of a drought based on the paleo data, but without climate change kind of put on top of that, how much weight should we give this information? Because it's climate change is the big knuckle curveball that you don't know what it's going to do. So this is good to know, but what do we do with it with climate change, screwing everything up?
I think you're exactly asking the right question, and so a couple of things, right? To look into an analysis like this, you need a multi-century record, right? So we get that only from paleo reconstructions at this point. The climate projections, give and take, are roughly 100-year outlooks, or 100-year projections. So, and every projection is unique, right, to an extent, and you cannot really look into this long-term transition of hydroclimate states. Okay, that's one point. Second point is, when we are talking about change, what's your reference for change, right? So here, with this analysis, you can at least get that reference, right? Which is, you can think of this as more like baseline. Okay. Third point, we did analysis for changes in drought duration and drought severity, right? So you can kind of look into that information coupled with this data, because there is climate projection information embedded in changes in drought duration and drought severity, drought inter-arrival time. But to do an analysis like this, to bring in climate projection information, I think is sort of unpractical at this point, and it's very hard to defend that, right? To bring in climate projection information, so you would need that really, really long record of projections, plus, these are climate projections, so there are a lot of assumptions and uncertainty in those projections. So it's a, yeah. Having said that, we do have a paper, and forgetting the exact year, it was Paul Miller, myself. We tried to do some of that type of analysis on the Gunnison River Basin, and it's a WRR paper where we try to do some of that on stream flow. So I think that would be my kind of response at this time on this.
Thanks, Shubhendu. Are there any other questions? We have just a couple minutes left. Just giving it a minute in case somebody is typing in the chat box. Okay. Well, I just put up our contact information again on the slide in case you get off and you do have a question for one of the presenters. So Heather, I don't see any more questions coming in. I think we can pass this back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Katie, and thank you to all of our presenters today. Very informative presentation. And thanks everyone for joining. Again, if you know someone that wasn't able to join, they can access the recording on the website at westernstateswater.org. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Bye.
Bye.